Thanks for joining me today, everyone. Today I have my longtime acquaintance. I wouldn't call us quite friends yet, Will, although I do enjoy listening to you a lot. But longtime acquaintance and podcast host, Will Smith of Acquiring Minds. He is also a partner in Minds Capital, which we will talk about quite a bit on the show because I'm super curious to hear how that's going. Will, welcome to Retain Trust and give us a little more about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Karl. Great to be here. As you said, my primary thing, my day job is as a host of Acquiring Minds. It's a podcast devoted to what we call ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, buying businesses as the path to entrepreneurship. 2 episodes a week, approaching 400 episodes, about 4 years old. It took over my life about six or so months into it. And I've been going full bore with it ever since. As you said, also a partner in Minds Capital, which is a fund that invests in independent sponsors, which is a flavor of ETA that we can get into if you're interested. Invest in independent sponsor deals. And we launched it off of the podcast. And now that too, happily, has a lot of traction, is doing really well, and is kind of taking on a life of its own. There's actually another podcast that we launched in association with that, with Minds Capital, called the Minds Capital Podcast. So 2 podcasts now, 3 episodes a week.
Yeah.
Keeps you busy.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I think a lot of people start a podcast and think that would be the dream, is to be able to do it full time. And now you are. Is it a dream, Will?
I hate to say it, you start to take things for granted. You know, the human brain, is always looking at the things you don't like instead of the things that are so great. I remind myself to step back and recognize how great it is. So I led with the negative, but the short answer to your question, Karl, is yes. It's really wonderful. Also, podcasting, people might perceive it to be like a great gig because it's like you're talking to people and having interesting conversations. But particularly when the subject matter really interests you. So I've done, and you might say, well, 400 episodes about buying businesses, how much can possibly be said? But so many of these guests and these stories, there's actually an enormous amount of variety. And I just feel like I'm talking to my people. These are entrepreneurs. So it doesn't really get old. It is kind of an infinitely interesting, or like the flavors and variations from story to story. There's not a lot of overlap or repeat. So it still feels fresh. So yeah, I'm basically having conversations with people whose brains I'd want to be picking anyway, who are kind of my people. I've always liked creating content in various forms, even though I've never been somebody who's like, oh, I want to be an influencer or a creator when I grow up. I don't like the term influencer, would never try to put myself to that. I don't think people even use that term anymore, but I never did.
Right.
But the truth is that most of my career has been doing content in various forms. And so apparently I like that. And so, yeah, I'm having a great time, and it's great that it's been successful.
It's a great show, and we'll let listeners, obviously follow up on whether they want to listen to Acquiring Minds, depending on what their interests are. But we'll kind of start this conversation a little bit at the beginning here and talk about, from the context, most of our listeners are agency owners, probably mostly founders. They started their business from scratch. A lot of them, what I've found is they don't really think about or know much about the path of entrepreneurship through acquisition. So tell me how you got first exposed to that and search funds and the things around that. And then, what your understanding of that space is today. Like, what does it look like?
That second piece is a big question. There's a lot going on in this world. But to the first part of your question, how I got involved. So I probably, like a lot of your listeners, agency owners, if they're the founders, have consider myself an entrepreneur. For the majority of my career, have been an entrepreneur in the sense that I've been working on my own businesses, an owner of my own businesses that I've created. The reason I got into ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, is I was actually in one of the few stints where I had a W-2, where I was working for somebody else. I was living in the Bay Area, working in tech, and I just had the entrepreneurial itch still, and so wanted to go. After not that long working for somebody else, I wanted to get back to being working on my own businesses, and I didn't have an idea, basically, that I felt that I just could just pour myself into, and that I really, really believed in. I actually was pretty involved in the indie hackers world then, which is kind of a community of entrepreneurs, people who are tech, many of them developers or at least tech related entrepreneurs looking to build maybe smaller businesses and not go the VC route, but build bootstrapped tech businesses is really what I would say. And there's a lot of energy in that community. This is going back now 6 years. So there's a lot of energy in that community around finding a good business idea. And I was doing that and just really coming up short. And I felt extremely frustrated that it's like, oh, I was starting to feel like, oh, so wait, you can't have a business if you don't have a great idea. And I was in San Francisco, and I have been, seeing the same headlines we all have for the last 20 years that basically entrepreneurship and, Mark Zuckerberg in his dorm room or Elon doing whatever has become kind of the picture of entrepreneurship. I had lost sight of the fact that any boring business owner, we call them boring businesses affectionately. Any boring business owner, any just service business is a form of entrepreneurship. Is entrepreneurship. I'd lost sight of that, and I also didn't realize that you could become a business owner by buying. I just didn't realize it was a path. Like many of my guests, by the way, they don't realize that this is a path because we think of entrepreneurship as 0 to 1, and we think of it as tech. And so ETA is kind of a rejection of both of those things. So anyway, I was figuring out where I could direct this entrepreneurial energy and desire, and finally, it occurred to me, kind of on my own. I was like, what if I buy an existing business and build from there? I didn't know anything about it. I didn't really think it was going to be possible, but I started Googling and quickly found out that not only was it possible, but that this was actually a thing.
Yeah, it's like a whole category.
It's a whole category. Yeah. So for the listeners who may not know this, it's a whole category. The top business schools are teaching it. So there's a whole kind of the MBA crowd doing this. There's people like me who kind of came to it mid-career. There's all kinds of ways in here. That was 4 years ago now because of podcasts like mine and other kind of elevating this path, other voices and stuff talking about this. There's that much more out there about it. So anyway, it was kind of love at first sight. I thought, wow, okay, this is the way. And I could talk about like what so turned me on about it, but I was like, this is the way. And I just became very interested. And long story short, ended up with a podcast about it. I can elaborate there, but that was kind of the origin story. My own entrepreneurial frustration, and finally arriving at, what if I buy a business instead of starting one from scratch?
I love it. It's funny because I was listening to Cortland Allen, I think was the guy's name, who did Indie Hackers and the podcast. So I assume, around probably the same times as you will, we were kind of both discovering these, what we'll call alternative paths to entrepreneurship. Although in reality, by the numbers, there's much more mainstream to actually start a small business, be it a local physical business or a little online agency, than it is to go start a big tech business, raise a bunch of money. That is the outlier, actually. But yeah.
Isn't that ironic? This sort of what we kind of talk about as a niche of entrepreneurship is actually the monster, and
that's right. Yeah.
Going to Mars is really the outlier, not the one.
Exactly.
But by the way, Karl, Cortland Allen, who you just named, I listened to that podcast obsessively. I binged it. I think in ways that I'm happy to report people now binge Acquiring Minds. And I really modeled when I thought about Acquiring Minds sort of philosophically or sort of like strategically how I wanted to position it. It was really modeled off of Cortland, because what I considered him to have done was, first of all, to elevate this quote unquote alternative path of entrepreneurship, bring a lot of attention to it, and surface the stories of all these interesting people who are doing it. And so you come to see how real it is, and he makes people in that community known names, known entities who might have otherwise been kind of working and succeeding but in obscurity. Yeah. So there was a lot about the way he built that I modeled when I was doing Acquiring Minds.
Yeah, I was going to observe that same thing. It feels like a similar type of show in that you're You really focused on a niche. You are kind of elevating these people. I don't want to say to celebrity status. That gives it too much, like influencer type feeling. It's not. It's just you're telling these stories from people that I would not normally get to hear on a mainstream business podcast or entrepreneurship podcast. They wouldn't be featured on CNN for raising $100 million like Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. Like none of these things, they don't get that level of play, and they don't need it. But it is cool to have these little niche podcasts or communities where you can actually access those people. And there's been guests on your show, I'm sure you hear this all the time, that I've reached out to personally and had good conversations with. I'm sure, like, people reached out to me after I was on your show. Like, it is a cool little community that you've helped build, and there's other places too for it. So I applaud you for that. I think you've really carried that same spirit that Cortland had with Indie Hackers.
Well, thank you, Karl.
ETA community.
Thank you. And I'll just follow up a couple thoughts there. So I was listening to Tim Ferriss was invited to a Harvard Business School class where he was the case study, and he actually came in live to like field questions. And the case study was about like Tim Ferriss, this is pretty recent, I think, has had all this success, but he's at a pivot point in his career. What should he do next? And part of the reason for him considering this in a pivot is because as a podcaster, podcasting has gotten so crowded. He was early, but now it's super crowded. Can he maintain enough differentiation, even with the brand and following that he has, to like make it continue to be worthwhile? I mean, he felt like his, competitive advantage was being eroded by the year, which may be true. And so, of course, as a podcaster listening to this, I was like, maybe I need to be thinking strategically about the future here. If Tim thinks podcasting, but of course, Tim does have his own angle on things. I'm not a listener. I've listened to an episode or two back in the day, but, optimization and performance, I think. But I suspect that he has on a lot of names that you could find in other places. And a lot of podcasts do. And I think that that's a reflex of podcasters, is to like, the bigger the name I can get, the better. So everybody's always, not everybody, but the reflex is to chase the big names.
Yeah.
And I think something that I've done, I can't claim to have done this through some grand strategic design, but more just kind of to try to elevate obscure people in a community, is insulated myself from that. So the people that I put on stage as guests are not going to be necessary. They're kind of I kind of discover them in a way. And I don't mean to inflate the importance of this.
No, that's right.
But it's kind of like somebody, bought a cool business in there somewheresville, somewhere state. And like nobody knows their story. And I just happen to, they've reached out to me or somebody's recommended them or whatever. And yet they've got this really, really cool story, deserve notoriety within this community. People would love to hear their story. And so I put them on stage, and you use the word celebrity. I love the idea of kind of making somebody a mini celebrity within this community. But anyway, it has this strategic advantage that a giant podcast like a Tim Ferriss might not, where many of the biggest podcasts, they just have big names, and you see those big names make the rounds. Somebody publishes a book, and then they appear on 15 podcasts. That's never going to happen with me. So you're not going to see names you see elsewhere, which means I'll never have a giant audience. Probably I'll never have a mainstream audience. But it is a way of kind of protecting my turf, I think.
Oh, totally. So actually, before we move off from the podcast topic, I did want to kind of ask, this is sort of two questions. One is, when did the podcast start opening doors for you and sort of leading to other opportunities? Because my take from the outside is that's sort of what almost accidentally happened. I don't think you started the podcast to become a partner in Minds Capital, but correct me if I'm wrong. And then when did you decide, oh, actually, I'm not searching anymore. This is the thing I'm doing now. You know what I mean? Like, you made that transition at some point where like you stopped looking to buy a business and just said, this podcast is my thing.
Look, I think anybody who's thought at all about content, which we all do because we're all in social media now, understands that distribution is really powerful. And so if you have an audience, everybody knows now that you can very likely, make a business if you have enough distribution. So always I was like, if I do a podcast and this podcast is about buying businesses, a topic that I'm just authentically and organically very interested in. So I wasn't doing it for this reason, but it was a great hedge or a great backup plan. That was like, if I can build an audience about this topic, this is a valuable topic. This is a big dollars topic. There will be vendor. I mean, there was just, I knew the business model would present it. I just knew there would be sponsorship dollars there. So I knew that there was, obviously money in this niche almost by definition. So that much I knew if I could build distribution, there would be something there, some sort of monetization. Whether or not you could actually launch an entirely new business or something more than sponsorship revenue, I wasn't sure, but I also was pretty confident that there would be there was likely to be something. And a fund investing in the people who came on the podcast is just it's the most obvious and natural kind of business to launch to this audience in the world. So I wasn't aiming at it. I didn't predict it, but it was also like so obvious. And in fact, I think Alex Bridgman, who kind of had an earlier podcast, it still does, around buying businesses, I think even did launch a fund. So I knew somebody else had done it. So anyway, it's a tried and true for somebody in my seat thing to do. The opportunity actually presented itself 2 years ago. So that would have been summer 2023. And so that was actually less than 2 years into the podcast. So that particular opportunity formally became a real one, less than 2 years in. And then I'd say just overall doors opening. I don't know that I can point to other specific examples, but within a few months or within a year, it was just clearly there was just energy here. And I don't have a specific answer for you, but there was like just enough traction and enough interest, and people were writing saying that they really enjoyed it, and the numbers were just going up. So there was just all kinds of like positive signals to keep going. Sorry. And then you had asked like when I decided that the podcast would be a thing and I'd stop searching. Episode 200 is the short answer. I officially said, I remember, because I wanted to do some sort of different episode for episode 200, different than just my typical interview. And so I wrote a little essay, and in that essay, I was like, I am not searching anymore. I am officially not searching. There's no time. And I actually said in that essay, part of the reason why was because of those those years when I was looking for a business idea and immersed in the indie hacker community where everybody is, trying to find some idea, put something out into the world that people will pay for. I really felt how precious it is to create something that people want and that the market responds well to. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah.
So rare.
Yeah. It's so rare, and you don't really realize it until you hit a drought or until you start putting stuff into the world and there's crickets. Yep. And you're like, oh yeah. Because when I was younger, I was like, I got a million ideas, and in fact, you'll still hear people say like, oh, ideas are easy, execution is everything. Well, actually, Cortland, I haven't listened to him in a few years, so I'm not sure he still says this, but he did back then, was like, actually, the idea matters a lot. You might think you have a good idea, but it's probably not. There really aren't that many. Good ideas actually are precious, as is execution. So Good ideas and good execution is what it takes. Both are precious, and you got to have them both. So anyway, I was like, I'm not going to take for granted that I have this product in the form of this podcast that has real, forgive me for using this phrase, but product market fit. I'm not just going to toss that aside. I'm going to lean into it. And I didn't have any other time, and all these other opportunities were coming up. So I didn't. So that's really what it was.
Super cool. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there is something to ideas, and it's maybe not just the idea in isolation. It's the idea mixed with timing and like tailwinds. And, you talk about this with guests a lot on the show when you go into the businesses they bought and some of the headwinds and tailwinds, what we call them in business speak, but essentially things working for the business or against the business that are external. And I think you're right that like finding an idea that has the right time and place and you're the right person to execute it is actually very rare. And it's one of the reasons that, and you said, again, we'll talk about this more, but like shots on goal or just getting in the game is so important, is that your first idea probably isn't that $1 million idea. Your first idea is probably trash. You just don't know it till you try it. And then you go through 20 more and eventually you find one that's good at the right time. So anyway, I appreciate that kind of like respect you have for the response the market gave, and just saying, I'm not going to just do what I said I was going to do just because. I'm actually going to follow where the demand is. And that's entrepreneurship 101 in my opinion. So,
but Karl, I will say that let me not like overlook the fact that the irony that the whole podcast is about buying a business as a path into entrepreneurship. And here I was saying, I'm not going to do that. I have a 0 to 1 business that I'm doing now.
Sure.
It wasn't imposter syndrome, but it was like, am I not being true to the entire message here by explicitly not following the very path that I'm celebrating? So,
yeah.
But I think everyone gets it. It's like, look, the point is not acquisition. The point is entrepreneurship. So when entrepreneurship through acquisition, ultimately, all of this is about becoming an entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur. Acquisition is a really compelling, interesting way in, and we'll talk about it. But the point is just to be an entrepreneur, not how you got there. So, and I think my audience gets that and feels that too.
Yeah. So I was going to reference that episode in 2023 because it's kind of one of my personal favorites because I like when you go through and distill some of the things that you've pulled out of all these conversations. Because in my head, I listen to most of the episodes and I start to distill some things, but I don't get every one of them. And, sometimes I get cut off halfway through, right? And you're having these deep, conversations where you're really focused. So you hear a lot. Anyway, so this episode, you kind of go into some of the things you've observed about successful or unsuccessful search and acquisition stories that you've had, heard, I guess, or talked through. There's a few things that stood out to me here. One is there's 2 character traits for buying and growing a business: hubris and humility. I love this because you're totally dead on. I oscillate as an entrepreneur between thinking I'm so smart and know what I'm doing, and I'm my shit doesn't stink, to what the hell am I doing with my life? I have no idea what I'm doing. Why didn't I just keep a job? I feel this on a month-to-month basis. So talk to me more about this, how you've seen this manifest itself in people who've bought businesses or looking to buy businesses.
There is just kind of inherent hubris to be like, I'm going to go buy a business and think I can do it better than the person that founded it. And by the way, something that's very common in this world, in an industry I have no experience in. So one of the very common patterns here is, kind of white collar entrepreneur type, professional type person buying a blue collar business. The trades businesses, I'm sure there's, most people have heard of now, like buying a plumbing business or something. That's what this is. And that is a common pattern. And so the idea that I am going to go buy a plumbing business, me, Will sitting here comfortably in my WeWork, who has lived behind a screen for his whole career, and do it better than the owner who built the thing over the last 25 years. There's just like a lot of like, who the hell do I think I am? But it is what it is. But then the humility, of course, is recognizing everything I just said and walking into the room and saying, I'm the dumbest, walking into the room when you buy the business and announcing yourself, day one speech, and just being an absolute sponge, just kind of lowering yourself to just being a student. And everybody in that business, everybody in that industry, everyone around you is somebody that you could and should learn from. And you just have to you just be as absolutely, I keep wanting to say dumb, but that's not the word. But it is the opposite of the smartest person in the room. So I guess it's the dumbest person in the room, and just deal with that. It's going to be a very steep learning curve. You're going to ask stupid questions, etc. So you just have to come at it with a deep, deep sense of being a student. And being a student is sort of kind of the ultimate in humility. You're looking at whoever's teaching you. You're saying, you know a lot, I know a little. Teach me. There's inherent humility in that. And so that's what that contrast was. I will say one other thing. There are people who don't go into this with humility. There's this kind of stereotype, and I actually don't think it's that true, but it's probably true in certain cases, where a very smart person, smart in quotes, they come from maybe Wall Street, they come from private equity, and they swagger into the business they buy and think that they are already smarter than everybody and behave accordingly. And as one of the cliches in the industry goes, the body rejects the organ.
Right.
They're the organ transplant and the body rejects it. There's a cultural, nobody wants to work for this smug Wall Street hotshot who thinks he's smarter than everybody. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. So while probably a lot of people are hearing me talk about humility and nodding and being like, yeah, well, how else would you approach this? There are the arrogant among us who might not approach it that way. And so they need to be reminded to be humble.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, as a business owner, and I talk to mostly founders who started their own business, that same dichotomy of humility and hubris appears in quote unquote regular entrepreneurs too, in that you have to be a little bit egotistical to think you can start a business, because most of us start it in a space with competitors, with other known entities. And it's not just an accident, there's some intentionality, and you have to think you can do something better, right? So there is some hubris no matter what. And then the humility hits all of us at different points in different ways. But certainly I've never heard an entrepreneur who's gone through 10 years of this and not had a moment or many moments and months of humility, because it is hard and things will not go the way you plan 100% of the time. So yeah, I think there's something there that's universal.
Exactly. And I was just going to say that I think what a lot of these things that these observations will make about a particular industry or path or whatever, you realize, oh, that's actually a universal pattern. So this combining, for kind of ambitious people, combining the audacity to think you can do something with extreme humility that, like, I think I can do this. I have an unrealistic sense of self-confidence, but also extreme humility at the same time. It's kind of paradoxical, but yes, I think that there are a lot of paths that you approach that way.
One of the things that I've talked to a lot of MBA grads who are working on a search fund or considering it. And one of the things that I hear from them a lot is they're looking for a less risky path to entrepreneurship. And you said in that episode, and you pointed this out, and I think this is a great observation, is it's not really less risky. It's just a different kind of risk. Talk to me more about that. Tell me how you think about risk in search funds and entrepreneurship through acquisition in general.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You hear the word risk a lot in this world, because particularly people who are coming from finance. So there are former finance people are overrepresented in this world naturally, especially coming from, say, private equity. But it's not all of them. And I don't want people to get discouraged if they're not from finance, because sometimes people do feel that way. You have to be former private equity to do this. No, not at all.
Yeah, I bought a business 2.5 years ago, and I'm not from finance. So
we exist. Plenty of people. Most people are not actually from finance, but you start to notice a pattern that there are a lot of them. Anyway, but the finance people, they think about risk really systematically. They've been trained to. A big part of finance is the quantification of risk and managing it. So it's a word that comes up more, whereas in 0 to 1 entrepreneurship, it's just tossed around as I could fail. And that would suck. So anyway, it has a more academic role in this world. But the reason I said that is because I think every story of entrepreneurship is unique. It's got all of its idiosyncrasies, so it's hard to generalize. Even within the world of search and search funds, there are flavors of search. But to give you one, the kind of screaming example of where there's a lot of, I would say there's more risk in search, is if you buy a business with an SBA loan, which is a common format here, you have to take a personal guarantee. And for those who don't know what a personal guarantee is, if the business fails and the SBA loan that you owe a monthly payment on, if you can't pay it for whatever reason, they're going to come after you personally. They're going to come after your assets personally. This is common in real estate land, but in business land, people are often shocked. And in fact, it's enough risk that some people choose not to go that path, to go do this path at all. If you're a 25-year-old and you have no assets, it's maybe a little bit less scary. But if you have assets, you could just really lose everything. And people do. I know somebody close to me here who I've interviewed a couple times. The bank's going after his house. There's debt in the world of buying businesses. And usually in 0 to 1 land, I know I'm generalizing here too, there isn't debt. Of course, there can be debt. Maybe you take friends and family, a loan from friends and family, and maybe that you even get an SBA loan to start a business, to start a franchise or something. So that, of course, it does happen. But it's in almost every case of buying a business, you're taking on debt. And so that loans increase risk to any organism. In 0 to 1 entrepreneurship has that a lot less. So often in a 0 to 1 case, You might suffer reputational damage. You'll lose your time. You might lose whatever money you put into it, but you probably won't go into the red on your personal balance sheet. Whereas that's a very real possibility on the ETA side.
Right.
So that if I had to really condense it, it would be in that.
Yeah.
But the reason people say it's less risky, Karl, is because you're buying a business that has revenue, that has customers. It's already proven itself in the marketplace. So where there isn't risk, or there's much, much, much less risk, is you don't have the risk of a failure to launch that so many 0 to 1 entrepreneurs have, even if they're doing something that's not a newfangled idea, even if they're just launching a new agency. We know that the agency business model works. We know that small businesses need marketing services, but you could still just have a failure to launch. And in that, the ETA helps de-risk that away.
Yep. Yeah, I was saying this, a very similar kind of idea was somebody that asked me about why buy up. 2.5 years ago, bought a podcast production agency. I already owned another agency. I know the technical skills to start a new agency. I don't know podcasting now at that time, and I could have learned enough of that, right? But they were asking why not just use some of your own money to self-start a podcast production agency from zero? And to me, the big drive or the big advantage was the hard part is customer acquisition. And I mean, not just getting somebody to try you out, but a long-term customer relationship. That takes time no matter what. And so when I buy a business, I'm looking at it like, can I pay for your long-term customer acquisitions that you've made and the goodwill you've built up with those customers? And that is unquestionably worth a lot. And you either have to pay the price in time or money, and you can decide which one you want to do. And again, to your point, you have to take, we took that, and that's a common practice. But, the bet is that the customer cash flow that's there will continue after the acquisition, and that will allow you to pay your debt. So it can work, and it doesn't work sometimes. You've had some guests on that, man, the openness they have around their failures, it's always impressive, right? And some of them have been anonymous, and most of them, sort of put themselves out there and actually say they're, what they do. And I think that's I applaud you for convincing people or finding people who are ready to do that, because it's hard. What are some of the things you've picked up from those failure stories, those failure cases? Is there any generalizations we can make, or is it a lot of just like kind of luck of timing, like things can just go wrong?
Yeah, I would say, so as I said, I've been an entrepreneur in various ways most of my career. So I've met, of course, a lot of other entrepreneurs who have failures. And those failures can be extremely disappointing, kind of like what we just talked about. But I don't feel like if you had to generalize or kind of take the average of the pain that ETA entrepreneurs, failing ETA entrepreneurs feel versus 0 to 1 entrepreneurs, I think they experience more pain. Anybody who's experienced pain in entrepreneurship is probably, cringing and say, "How dare you measure my pain?" But
Right.
there's a concept in entrepreneurship through acquisition, in the ETA world, of the fetal position moment. It's a concept that I've actually kind of elevated because a guest talked about it. That he had this 2 a.m. naked on the cold bathroom tile floor, in the fetal position moment, not knowing what the hell he was going to do. That sort of fear, I don't hear, and where you're just buckled over like that. And I just don't hear about it as much in 0 to 1 land. I can't get customers. I can't get traction. I'm winding things down. And I'm not trying to minimize that pain, but I feel like the fear feels to me more acute in an ETA land. Again, because of the debt piece, but also because you've bought a business and all these people are now depending on you. I know the 0 to 1 entrepreneurs are saying, yeah, but I have employees, they're depending on me too. True, point taken. But it's like, you go into this plumbing business that you've bought, and there's 30 people who've been, merrily employed all this time. You come in as the new owner with that, the audacity of thinking like you can do this. And then shit starts going south. You feel like you're ruining a perfectly good business. All these 30 families are depending on you. You've got an SBA debt hanging over your head. You don't see a way out. It's terrifying for people. So that would be point number one. Point number two would be that this is not my data. Jed Morris, a guy who has been on the podcast and had a failure story and has, in the wake of his own failure, has gone around and found other ETA failure stories and kind of compiled them into, I think he's going to publish a book around it. But he's also got some data. It's not maybe statistically significant, but it's probably from 30 or 40 stories. Number one reason for failure is actually seller fraud. So interestingly and shockingly to the naive among us, there's just a lot of people, apparently, or more people than you'd think, who are willing to sell you their business that they know could ruin you financially. And as long as they give you the hot potato and walk away and take your money, they're fine. They can sleep at night. I guess they can sleep at night. They're fine with that. It happens more than you'd think. It's the number one reason why ETA stories go wrong.
That's good to know in a way, because that's a theoretically preventable, or at least sometimes preventable failure case, right? Like, in that there are a lot of times with small business acquisitions where people skip levels of diligence or skip, verifying things because it's too small. It's not worth the time, not worth the effort. So I think there's probably a message there of like, it's always worth the time and effort to double check, those bank statements, the tax records, the whatever, to make sure. But I have heard on your show some of those cases be like things that you couldn't have found, so that's scary in its own right.
I mean, yes, it does tell you that you should not skimp on due diligence. There's a temptation when you're searching out there to buy a business and you're trying to, husband your scarce resources. You've been unemployed. You're looking for a business. And then you got to spend money on these vendors to get your transaction across the line. One of those vendors would be a financial diligence firm, an accounting firm that does so-called Q of E's, quality of earnings reports. It's basically a financial due diligence deliverable where they go and look at the business and really analyze how the revenue that's being claimed, how solid is it? So you should do a Q of E. There's always, should I not? You basically should. But they're 10, 20, can be more, than $20,000 and more. So it's a big expense. So people are tempted not to do them. So yes, it does tell you that. The problem though, Karl, is that what I've also seems to be the case is like, it is very hard to diligence the seller's character. So if you have the misfortune of dealing with a seller who's dishonest, they're going to do everything they can to obfuscate the fact that they're dishonest, because everything, one of the very first things that we're doing as we're buying a business and talking to a seller for the first time and every time is trying to sniff out if we can trust them and them you. So it's top of mind. No one's forgetting to ask themselves, oh, is this person trustworthy? If you get a whiff that this seller isn't trustworthy or is a little smarmy, you run. Everybody knows that. So it's not like we forget it. It's just that dishonest people, especially if they've built a business, that probably means they're very effectively dishonest. And so you're dealing with real pros at lying. And it's it just seems like it's extremely hard to tease that out.
Scary, but good point. You said something a second ago that I want to, I'll give you my personal take on it. You kind of mentioned that failure feels worse, or it can seem worse maybe, or it's perceived as worse by the ETA entrepreneur. And I think there's something to that. And here's my theory on this, is that those of us who are 0 to 1 entrepreneurs get the opportunity to level up to levels of pain. So what I mean is, I know guys who run 10, 20, $100 million businesses, right? And they have very big, sometimes they run through very big challenges where they're on the order, like their orders of magnitude problems are much larger than mine with my small multi-million-dollar businesses. And I think, man, how do they sleep at night? But what I realize is they've leveled up to it pretty gradually in most cases. You know what I mean? Like,
good point.
They had a moment like I did at year 2 where they almost ran out of money, but it was only $10,000, $20,000 on the line. So it wasn't that big a deal. I've had those kind of moments, right? But those have made me strong enough to now, when I get into a situation where I see cash flow is negative, things are looking the wrong way, I start to make a plan for getting out of that hole faster, earlier. And I have the ability to go through harder things that I wouldn't have been able to do 2, 3, 4 years ago. I think the challenge to ETA entrepreneurs is you jump straight into a $5 million business. Yes. I mean, like it could be, it doesn't have to be, but you jump straight into that and you're like, oh shit, now like I have $1 million payroll running that I can't make. And that is scary. That's more than your personal assets. It's more than you've ever made in your life. Like you think of the hole you've just dug yourself and it could be massive. So that's my theory, is that it's partly psychological, partly real financial, but it's you didn't get the chance to level up to it like a typical entrepreneur would.
What a great point, Karl. And so part of ETA is that it is a shortcut. Let's be honest about what this is. You are instead of building a plumbing company over 10 years, you're jumping right into a 15-year-old plumbing company. So yeah, excellent point. And I will also say that if you one other thing that you'll see from people in this world is that those fetal position moments happen early in their journey. Why? Because is it because the problems then go away after that? Of course not. It's just that they haven't yet developed the skin, the thick skin, and eventually they do. And so crises keep happening, but they have the armor. They get that armor over time, and so they level up. But that first, getting in the first 6 months or 12 months, they haven't. Yeah, it's such a shock to the system that they haven't had a chance to build any armor yet, and they eventually do, happily.
Yeah, right. We all do. This is like the only way to build that armor is suffering a little bit. And so it's an interesting challenge I think about a lot, is that psychological strength that we're trying to build as entrepreneurs. But that is kind of the name of the game, or the big asset that transfers no matter where our financial assets go. I wonder, this is kind of a very related thread here, is that there's this debate in the ETA world around buying small, manageable businesses that you can wrap your arms around. And the failure case is like, I won't go personally bankrupt. At least maybe I have to, restart my home mortgage or something, but it's not the end of your financial world. That's one way to do this. The other way to do this is get the maximum amount of debt, raise as much equity as you can, and like buy the biggest, most resilient business you possibly can, because theoretically larger business, more cash flow, more resilience, more ability to hire key leaders that are really good. There's lots of reasons. But anyway, what's your take on that? Like, where do you land on that spectrum? What's quote unquote right or best, or what have you seen work most? I don't know. What do you think about it?
It's a hard one, Karl, and I'm gonna punt on the question. I'll just share with the audience the arguments for both. You've done a good job of kind of highlighting a few of them already. But I mean, look, if you really, really pressed me, I would say go bigger. So so I do have an answer. Go bigger. But the reason, and so let me highlight the reasons that just add to your list, and then I'll talk about why I'm not so emphatic on going bigger. So going bigger means you buy a bigger business, and basically because it's, like you said, it's a more resilient business. It's a more robust business. It's not, one bad season away from collapse. It's not a house of cards. And the bigger it is, the more likely it is to have some sort of management layer. That might just mean a single general manager, so that when you get in there as the new owner, you can be working, as the cliche goes, on the business rather than in the business. You can be spending your time strategically on growing the business rather than just the operational stuff to keep the trains running on time. So the more you can be doing the strategic stuff, is the high value, high leverage work. There's more and sooner you can be doing that stuff, one hopes, the faster the business grows. And the more fun it is, let's be honest. On the flip side, so the smaller businesses are worse for all the opposite reasons. I mean, they are extremely fragile. I interviewed a guy yesterday who, by the way, end of his story is just absolutely incredible. He's built a business that does millions of dollars of profit a year. So it's an incredible outcome over about 13 or 14 years. But he bought really, really small. He bought a commercial refrigeration servicing business. Imagine the big cooler at the back of your Whole Foods or Publix. When it needs service, they call this business, okay? Local service business, blue collar service business. When he bought it, it was 5 employees, a couple $100,000 of SDE, barely.
That's barely viable.
It's barely viable. It's just a tiny little weak business. One guy quits. There goes 20% of your revenue. Just walked out the door.
Right.
Incredibly fragile little business. Now it worked out for him. Worked out incredibly well. And so I almost certainly would say don't buy a business that small. It's just too fragile. There are success story after success story of people getting in that way, like Ling Tran is his name. But they're Ling himself was like, I wouldn't invest in somebody buying a business like I bought. The tiny businesses are more fragile, and you're going to be just working so in the business. You're going to be the GM of that business. You're not going to be you're going to have to figure out how to grow over a year or 2 or 3 to get to the point where you can hire a GM and finally free yourself to be spending time on strategic initiatives, which again is where we want to be spending our time. Okay. But the problem is, like, the bigger businesses are harder to find. They're the ones that everybody wants. And so the question becomes not is bigger better. Basically, it mostly is. It's how long do you wait to find how much of it's really hard to find a business with $1 million of earnings that you single SBA searcher can go buy. So how much of an exception do you make? Do you come down to 750 or 600 or $500,000 of earnings? What is big enough? And so people on the podcast encounter these businesses that aren't as big as they wanted. They're not as big as the ideal. And we call the ideal, $750 to $1 million of earnings, so-called SDE. So they're shy of that, but how shy is too shy? And so that becomes a hard question, because you could search forever and not find a business with $1 million of earnings. And then you just never got in the game. And so I also don't advocate that.
I was going to say that one of the messages that comes through in a lot of your episodes is the value of getting in the game. And I hear this, both you say it, but also I think a lot of the guests almost imply it in that, they do something like buy a really tiny business the first time around, or they start off buying a business that loses half its revenue overnight, and then they take 10 years to build it back up to, like this massive machine that they've done. But it's like the reason they were able to do that was because they got a foot in the game. They didn't just sit on the sidelines looking to acquire for 5 years, right? But I do think that's a really interesting thing to weigh. The other thing I would say add to that is just that you have to weigh your own personal risk tolerance and just be honest with yourself. Like, again, like some searchers I meet, they honestly are saying they want to buy big, but they're too scared to pull the trigger on anything that big. So they just kind of never do. And they sit on their hands. And that's again, part of this equation has to be like, you're never going to be 100% comfortable, but how do you make yourself comfortable enough to actually execute and go through with something? You're right. There's no one answer. And I appreciate your perspective on it. And I agree with you. If I were to quote unquote do it over again, I would go bigger as well. So that would be my advice too. But I would also say that I get the other argument. Yeah.
Oh, so you have felt the smallness.
Yeah. And I will say we were very fortunate with the small business we bought, but it is very small. And so I'll give you just a very tangible example of how this manifests. The message here for agency owners listening is this is what buyers think about as they evaluate your business. So make your business something that we want, right? For example, a business like we have where it's got 250 to 300K in SDE when we bought it, after it's paying the loan, cannot support a $150,000 a year salesperson. If it did, that's the whole margin, right? That would be all gone. So we have to look at, well, we don't want to have to do sales forever. How do we carve out enough, cash flow to pay a salesperson? So we got to hire a little more junior of a salesperson, right? And that's okay. It works out okay, but we miss some opportunities we probably would get if we had a expensive, high dollar salesperson. And those same kinds of sacrifices have to be made all over the business. And again, it's not that we have bad people. I love the team that we work with. They're fantastic. But we just can't afford like that next level of manager operator. And there's just no way around it. So that means we have to do those roles for longer. It slows down the growth. And we've been looking at there's other strategic ways to do this. You can start to merge and buy, and we're looking at some stuff like that down the road. But anyway, I do think it was a great experience getting in the game, and I don't regret that part. But I would say if I were to sort of start at zero again, I'd go maybe 2 to 3 times as big, exactly for the reasons you said. So just my take.
Well, and you highlight a great reason that I missed, which is that it's not just about a bigger business giving you the ability to focus your attention on strategic stuff. It's also having the financial resources coming out of the business. The business is generating enough cash that you can actually act on these strategic ideas that you have.
Yeah,
so it's both your attention and then the cash to go make the hire or do the whatever.
Yep. But to your point earlier, getting in the game has opened up so many other opportunities that I wouldn't have had 2-3 years ago without buying the second business. And there's been times when, we've been able to share a lot of resources between the two we now have. And there's lots of advantages. So again, no part of me thinks this was a bad decision. It's just like, yeah, you're always trying to learn from previous experience to optimize for the future. So
Karl, can I give you 2 examples on getting in the game?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's such a great point that comes up. They came up as recently as an email I received yesterday morning. A guest, Dan Drake of mine, who came on, who bought kind of an industrial distribution business in Oregon, in Bend, I think. Yeah. Anyway, so he was on sometime about a year ago, I'd say, and his largest supplier. Basically, he bought his largest supplier. Yeah, one of his suppliers. And actually, that supplier had heard his podcast and took an interest in him, and they got to talking. But the point is that, like, only because he wouldn't have been able to buy the supplier, and it was to do some vertical integration. He wouldn't have ever had access to that, but for already having this relationship, already being in the game, already being respected as a fellow owner, already, the person that sold to him, who's a retiring boomer, sees this young guy as somebody who's capable because he figured out how to buy a business. Like, that alone gives you a lot of cred. Opportunities kind of present themselves. And other owners see you as legit. You're kind of in the club, especially, I think, if you've bought a business, because buying a business is, even as many small business owners as there are out there that are successful or whatever, many of them haven't ever bought a business. And so it's totally mysterious to a lot of people and intimidating. And so if you got yourself into the business, into the industry by buying a business on your way in, people are kind of like, wow, that's pretty cool and impressive. One other quick story for you, Karl. So a searcher I know, he hasn't bought a business yet. He's trying to buy an accounting business and then kind of do a programmatic acquisition strategy, meaning for the audience that he buys more and more and more, kind of rolling up. And he was just a lone guy, and he was sending emails to presidents, owners, CEOs of local accounting firms, getting no traction at all. Like, no one was responding to him or whatever. So he decides to spin up his own accounting practice, his own accounting firm, by basically hiring a single accountant on contract to, be the accountant, and then, I guess go on Upwork and get some accounting gigs and hang a shingle and put up a website. And now he owns an accounting practice. And now he goes out and he approaches these owners and he says, this is my accounting practice and I'm looking to buy more. And he gets just crazy response rates. I mean, and they all respond to him because they see him as a fellow traveler. He's in the club. He's a fellow owner. So it's really interesting how there's just other owners. There's a bias toward accepting you if you're one of them and not if not.
Totally. Oh man, that resonates hard with me when we went through this buying a business. Having another business that we already ran was such a huge advantage to those conversation starters, because I intuitively knew how to talk to entrepreneurs because I was one. They respected that I was one. And you're totally right, Will. It doesn't matter how big or small your venture is. The fact that you're out there in the game with us, we had the sense of camaraderie in a way. And then you just get to skip a lot of that like barrier that owners put up around some MBA grads trying to buy my business. Like, I don't want to mess with that, So, man, we only got to like half my questions, but I don't want to keep you too long. I have one last one that I always ask everybody because I'm always building my reading list. Any books you've read in the last year or two that really impacted you? It doesn't have to be entrepreneurship related, but certainly can be.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 books, Karl. So I was gifted Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time, which is basically essentially a book on executive assistants. And it's not like I was unfamiliar with the concept. So I'm not sure how much new is really in this book, but it made a splash. Everybody seemed to be reading it for a few months there. I did too. And for whatever reason, it was the nudge I needed to start taking action on that, more than necessarily being good book or not. It was just kind of like, it forced me to take action in the direction of delegation.
That's a good book.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good book. Well said. So that's my entrepreneurship pick, but I do have another pick that was totally unrelated to entrepreneurship, but was a really fascinating one. American Nations: A History of the 11 Rival Regional Cultures of North America. So this is totally random, totally historic. So I don't know if your audience will even care, but it's basically I love these. I love sometimes kind of historians, anthropologist types will look at our country and through a different lens and characterize the regions or the groupings of Americans in different ways. And this book did that. It breaks the history into these nations, and by nations it means ethnic and cultural backgrounds, backstories. So it breaks down in a very interesting way. Appalachia is one of the nations. Texas, Mexico is another one of the nations. The Quakers is one of the so you've heard some of the names, and others are total inventions by the author. And just in this time of political confusion and strife, I'm trying to understand America in different ways, and this book definitely did that. It gave it a very different perspective on who we are as a people. So, not related to business, but still a really good one. And I don't think it's very well known. It came recommended to me, so it's not a well known book, but it was pretty fascinating if you're into American history.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rec. I'm getting to be a bigger and bigger nerd for history in the last 5 years. I don't know if it's something about getting older and you see more of it and you're like, I want to actually learn more or something. But I love that. Well, Will, again, this has been great. Thanks so much for doing this. We'll have links to your LinkedIn and podcast and all that good stuff in the show notes. And obviously, because I've got a million other questions to ask you, someday we'll do this again. But thanks so much for coming on, and have a great rest of your day, Will.
Great conversation. Thank you, Karl. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this episode of Retain Trust. If you like this one, give it a thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds and it helps others find out about the show. And if you have questions or suggestions for a future episode, leave a comment. See you next time.